everyone. My name is Dustin, and I am a grad student here at the University of West Georgia. I'm currently in the sociology program, and my presentation today will be about ageism, specifically ageism in the workplace. Now, if you didn't know, my interest in this topic came from Miss Vivian Wood, a sociology professor here. She had a class a few years back called Ageism Past, Present, and Future, and this really sparked my interest in this topic. And ageism pretty much just sounds like it sounds. It is discrimination or prejudice based off of age. And what makes ageism such a unique topic is that it's often viewed as being a much more overlooked form of discrimination or prejudice compared to other forms, such as racism or sexism. And most of the general discussion, as well as the literature around ageism, is geared toward elderly victims. This is likely due to the fact that majority of the victims of ageism are in fact elderly, but it's important to not forget other age groups. So for this presentation, we'll be examining all age groups, such as young adults, teenagers, and elderly as well, because anybody can be the victim of ageism. But specifically, older workers. Around 3 out of 5 older workers have witnessed or experienced age discrimination, which is an insane amount if you think about it. Also, nearly 25% of older workers report being the victim of specifically negative remarks in the workplace. Now, we'll go into more detail about the various forms of discrimination as well as the effects and consequences, but for right now, we're going to be focusing on hiring, harassment, termination, and things like that. Now, most of us can probably agree that discrimination of any kind is negative and shouldn't happen, but the true extent of the problem of ageism in the world may come as a surprise to a lot of people. There are just some statistics here. Older workers will make up nearly a quarter of the U.S. workforce by 2024. This is due to a variety of reasons, but one of the major ones is that the advancements of healthcare have led to just people retiring later and just more older workers being present than ever before. Also, this documented cases of discrimination have nearly doubled in the last 30 years. This may come as no surprise considering just the fact that there's more older workers in general, but nearly a quarter of these workers report facing age discrimination in the workplace at some point. Also, over $800 million paid for settlements related to age discrimination. There is huge financial incentive to combat age discrimination and help prevent it to avoid these settlements. But nations such as Japan, China, and Korea have actually been found to have lower levels of age discrimination and bias, whereas Western countries such as US, Germany, and Australia tend to have higher. Now, this is being debated still today. People still don't know the true extent as to why this is, but one of the major reasons people theorize is the collectivist versus individualistic culture debate. And this asserts that countries such as Japan, China, and Korea have more collectivist cultures so that they have more emphasis on family, the elderly, taking care of one another, whereas the US has more self-serving individualistic culture. And not only can ageism be found in every age group, it can also be found in every nation as well. One study that I looked at found ageism can be found in 96% of studies that they observed. And also another study that I saw has an upward of 90% of people experiencing harassment or age discrimination at some point in their lives. And of course, this harassment leads to numerous consequences, one of the major ones being mental health problems such as depression or anxiety, which is not too surprising. But one more interesting one is overall lower life expectancy. So this discrimination and harassment can actually lead to lower life expectancies and cause one to die sooner. And this can be observed in the workplace, which is what this presentation will be focused on. It can also be seen in the housing markets, criminal justice, and healthcare. Restricting access to healthcare or being looked at differently by a jury or judge based on your age, things like that. But this one will be focused on workplace. And different kind of examples, you have harassment, abuse, negative environments, toxic environments, and restricted access to resources. And one of the biggest things about this is that it cuts off the potential for great employees. If you only hire young people or don't want to hire older people, you're cutting off a big portion of your population that may do good for your company. Now, one of the major questions about ageism is why is it so socially acceptable? One of the major rationalizations is that it's necessary. Like I said before, you have to be a certain age to drive a car, rent a car, be in the military, have a job, things like that. And a lot of people assert that this is necessary because there's differences in the age groups, and that's true. But one of the things that Vivian Wood's class taught me is that there's differences in the age groups, but there's positives and negatives to all age groups. So while younger people may have better memories and coordination, older people may have better wisdom and better with certain puzzles. So there's positive and negatives to all age groups. One age group is definitely not better than the other. So this just creates the need for diversification in the workplace, especially in companies that serve customers that serve a wide variety of ages. It's good to have that representation. But one of the major difficulties in this, in age discrimination in general, is proving it. And we'll go into more detail on this later when we're talking about the acts and stuff. But right now exists a major difficulty in proving it and also reporting it as well, which leads to such low numbers in people reporting it. One study found that only 40% of people who experienced discrimination actually ended up reporting it. There's multiple reasons behind this lack of discussion, which we'll go into later. And due to the prevalence of ageism around the world, there have been tons of solutions that people have put forth on how to combat this. Some are still being implemented, some have worked, some have not. But some examples here are cohabitational programs or intergenerational programs, legislative acts, international standards, and incentives for companies to hire older people so that there's a financial incentive to do so, and educational programs seeking to change the culture and raise awareness about aging in general. And the current legislative act, the Age Discrimination Act of 1967, it prohibits age discrimination on individuals aged 40 and up. Only age 40 and up, interestingly, but there's issues with this and a lot of critiques about this. One of the major ones is being difficulty in proving or finding compensation for age discrimination. Like I said earlier, it's difficult in proving it. The burden of proof is all on the victim, unfortunately, under the current act. Another one is that there's no protections for ageism targeted towards younger workers. Like I said, it's only age 40 and up, interestingly, which we'll talk more in detail about later, but there's no proven method yet, and many of these are still being tested, like I said. So one of the more interesting solutions proposed for ageism is actually intergenerational living, or multi-generational living. This is essentially older individuals residing in college communities or campuses, or vice versa, college students living in retirement communities. Now this may sound kind of weird at first, but programs like this are growing by the daily and exist all across the nation now. So basically what this does is that it allows older individuals the chance to gain new insight on things by taking new classes, and also gives them access to campus facilities such as the gym or library. But most importantly, what this does is that it helps combat stereotypes. By forcing a young person and older person to live with one another and talk with one another, they are able to get past some of these biases and stereotypes that they may have. So the young person may get past the stereotype that all old people are, senile and useless, whereas the older individual may realize that younger people are not all, rebellious and angsty. So this definitely allows the connections to be created, allows some of these biases to be, gotten rid of, and often benefits both students and older individuals. So it's definitely a mutually beneficial agreement. But what's interesting is that nearly 64 million individuals now live in these kind of homes, which is much more than it was a few years ago. So these kind of new multi-generational facilities are growing by the daily. So another solution, and often the one that's most talked about, is legislative acts. So the current major legislative act for age discrimination is the ADEA, the Age Discrimination in Employment Act of 1967. This was signed by Lyndon B. Johnson, and as I mentioned before, it prohibits age discrimination, but it has major drawbacks. Remember, it only applies to people aged 40 and up, as well as the burden of proof. So this definitely creates the need for additional legislative acts to come forward. One of the major proposed ones is the Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act, the POWADA. And this essentially would elevate age discrimination cases to be equal to other forms of discrimination, such as racism or sexism, and also will restore the burden of proof. So basically what that means is that the burden of proof currently lies on the victim. So the victim of age discrimination, if they accuse someone of doing that, they have to find the proof. They have to prove that they were being discriminated against. Whereas in other cases, it is the employer that has the burden of proof. So the employer has to provide proof that it didn't happen. Essentially what that means. But unfortunately, the law is currently stuck in Congress. It was introduced a few years ago, but right now, due to likely other issues happening right now, it has been just stuffed and is undiscussed.